So can you just write? Yeah, just write. Just go and join again. So is it on now? Oh, we got one person back on. But how is the other one still going?
It's not stuck.
Oh, okay. So
What
no, I was
Worry
actually
about it later.
I was somebody bashed me and like dropped my phone. I just pressed the wrong button. Anyway, these things happen. All right, so now where did I get to? I was talking about the importance of a wish list and about getting your wish list to people that you can get their opinion, and then you can structure when you're putting the fish in the tank, and in reference to groups, and you can really, you've got to understand and respect two things. First of all, the 1 month rule. So the 1 month rule is extremely simple. You put some fish in the tank, and then you've got to allow 1 month before you allow any new fish in the tank. And what that'll do is control what's called the pathogen life cycle. So there's various pathogens that will be in and on your fish, and then they will have various life cycles. So therefore, the pathogens will drop off the fish, will tend to reduplicate on a hard surface, and then will often come back looking for a new host. So that whole process will take a different length of time depending on the various pathogens that we're talking about. And in the industry, we talk about white spot and a bunch of other very general names for all different specific types of pathogens. And so various ones have got different life cycles. And then there's a lot of very effective quarantining methods, like, for example, the tank transfer method, which has been absolutely proven to be a very good way of lowering the chance of introducing a pathogen. But there's no such thing as not ever having pathogens, because, for example, you might be doing a tank transfer method to reduce white spot, or a form of white spot, and in general 99% of what you're doing is very, very effective. But then you can still get individual little pathogens that aren't following the standard life cycle, that might have a double life cycle. Or so the way that everything evolves is that not all of the organisms behave in the same way. So some of them might have a much longer time on the fish, may have a much longer time on a hard surface, may have a much longer time as a dinoflagellate. Not all of them behave the same way. So
just to be clear, that rule is across the board for as long as you have a fish tank. That's not just when you're setting up a fish tank, is it? That further rule?
So I believe in the 1 month rule under all circumstances. So at no point will I introduce or recommend introducing a fish if I've put fish in within the last month, or if I've had any issues within the last month. So if I've had anything happen in the tank that may have caused stress, I'll start the month again. I'll actually not put any new fish in at all. So the next thing that we have to appreciate is salinity. So something that I come back to again and again is the really basic rules of osmoregulation. Now, in the wild, 1.024, well, not really, 1.025, even up to 1.027. So the ocean is generally, quite salty. But if you go introducing fish into a high salt environment, then the fish are using a lot of energy on their osmoregulation. So the osmoregulation is balancing the amount of salt within the body of the fish and the environment. So therefore, Therefore, if you get fish out of a high salt environment and you put them into a low salt environment, you'll find they're totally fine. So we will regularly, divers will regularly catch the fish out of 0.027, throw them straight into 0.017. Fish are totally fine because the salinity of a fish is half seawater. So therefore they're using their osmoregulation system to balance the salt in the environment. And that osmoregulation system uses a lot of energy. So if you're able to put the fish into a lower salinity, you're easing osmotic pressure, and therefore there's more molecular energy straight away available for the immune system. Because if anything stresses a fish, then the first thing that happens is the immune system, the energy gets taken out of the immune system. Because if the fish is stressed because they're about to get eaten by a shark or whatever, then their fight or flight system is going to be fully activated. Their circulation system, their respiration system, anything that makes them fit and fast and strong and agile and alert are all going to go into overdrive. But the immune system's just going to stop because the fish aren't worried about having a disease if they're about to get eaten. So then what should happen is the fish should duck away and find somewhere that it's like hopefully go and hide somewhere, and then it will start to calm down. And then it often can take 3 weeks from when the fish is physically calmed down until the immune system's actually back in full swing. So once again, the 1 month rule is really respecting and allowing for that. So in a perfect world, we have a brand new tank. We run a salinity of like 0.020, nice and low, specific gravity. Then we'll leave the fish in there for 1 month. During that month, we could then start up our quarantine tank. We can then put some fish in the quarantine tank, also at a salinity of 0.020. Then we can monitor the fish. We can make sure that they're all happy and doing what they're meant to do. Then we can slowly raise the salinity again. So once again, you go down as fast as you want. Straight out of salt, straight into fresh, no problem. Go back the other way, big problem. Because all of a sudden you're increasing osmotic pressure, you're denying the immune system, and the other thing you're doing too is you're aiding the pathogens. So if you, let's say there's a collector in Indonesia or whatever, and he's gone in his canoe and he's caught the fish out of 0.027, he's thrown it straight into 0.017, then the pathogens, most of them, they hate the water being fresher. So therefore, you're really creating an environment which is a disadvantage to most pathogens and then an advantage to the fish. Then you really want to raise your salinity nice and slowly. So the way you want to raise your salinity is by either doing a little bit of a water change with higher salty water, taking a bit of water out of the aquarium, dissolving some salt in it, tipping it back in, and you're really only wanting to raise like a degree or so a day. So you want to slowly raise it up. And then once you've started adding coral to your main tank, you're going to run your tank hopefully around sort of 0.024, 0.025, and then you can use your quarantine tank to put the fish in at the lowest salinity. You can monitor them at the lowest salinity. You can slowly raise the salinity up. Then once your salt level temperature and pH is the same in your quarantine tank as it is in your main tank, then you can just catch the fish and throw them straight in there. You don't need to acclimatize them if those 3 parameters are already right. So that's really your best way of going about it. On the other hand, if you don't have a quarantine tank, like I'll be so often like in somebody's house and I'm like, look, you really need a quarantine tank. And he's like, oh, I just don't have room for one. And I'm like, oh, what about there or there or there or there? And I mean, often this is a person that's got 13 rooms and I'm pretty sure he hasn't been in all of them and telling me he doesn't have any room for a quarantine tank. You've always got room for a quarantine tank. And a quarantine tank is the best thing that you'll ever buy because shoving fish in without protection is very dangerous. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble. So we So the alternative to having a quarantine tank, if you want to run it bareback, then you can just whack the fish in there and then give it a good month. Hope that they haven't brought any diseases into your tank. So once again, you want to run the salinity on the low side when you shove them in, and then you can slowly raise the salinity again. If you've got really hardy corals, you'll find that they just deal with it. Some of your aquaporas and some of them don't really appreciate it. So lowering the salt to help the fish is a very good idea, but then it's not such a great idea for the corals. But then what you don't want to do is lower the salt to help the fish and then forget about it and then not raise it back up again. Otherwise you're helping your coral, you're helping your fish and killing your coral. So once again, the value of a quarantine tank is also the stability for the corals. So run ourselves a fish list, use a quarantine tank, add the fish at a lower salinity, slowly raise the salinity once you're happy with the fish, and then wait a good month before you introduce more fish. And that rule applies to the main tank, and it also applies to the quarantine tank. So what this is all about is stress versus immune system. So the fish have an unbelievable immune system. It's unbelievably effective at keeping the fish nice and healthy. But stress is what deactivates the immune system. So creating an environment where there's no fish in there that are going to bash the other fish and create a stressful environment, making sure there's plenty of good oxygen so they're not freaking out because they don't have enough oxygen, creating nice stable water parameters so the fish aren't burning from acid because your pH is too low or anything like that, and then having plenty of holes and hidey holes and places where the fish can duck away and hide is really important too. Because if a fish has got a place that they feel safe and they can run away and duck away and feel safe, then that's a really good idea. So quarantining fish is an absolute must. Making sure there's hidey holes and places for the fish to hide in is very important. Quarantining corals is also a very good idea. It's nowhere near as important or as common, but an equally good idea. And then I did see a little mention there from Scott about dipping. So coral dipping is a great idea. So you can coral dip, you can even fish dip. If you've got any concerns for your fish, you can do freshwater baths on your fish, and you can dip your corals. There's a lot of dipping solutions available now that you can give your corals a bit of a dippity dip before you put them in the tank. So I do think that's an excellent idea.
Vugel or KY, that sort of stuff for protection?
Vugel is very good. So Vugel is a artificial immune booster. I've got to go out and talk about fish food now anyway, so let's do that. I'm just going to see if I've got any to talk about. So what this is, sold out. Yeah, sold out of it all. Damn. All good. Yeah, so there are, Easy Life has got a product called Vugel, which I found it's really good, just to artificially stimulate the fish's immune system. So some people like a bit of stimulation. Now food. Okay, so let's have before I get sidetracked talking about stimulations, let's talk about fish food. So fish food, fish keeping is 50% about water quality and 50% about nutrients. So you hear people all the time saying you keep healthy water and you'll have healthy fish, but they'd be very hungry fish. So 50% of fish keeping is about the nutrients that you actually choose. So most fish foods is commercialized crap in a can. So how cheap can they make the food with the coolest looking label in which the fish will want to eat in order to return profit to shareholders is the general idea with fish food. But there are a couple of fish foods that are much more pride-driven than profit-driven. So I have two fish foods that I am excessively biased on. Number one is Danichi. So Danichi is a slow-cooked food. Now, what you don't want is a heavily processed, heavily pressure-cooked. You don't want that. You want a really natural caking agents. This also contains like clay and so forth to make sure it's not completely digestible, so it can move right throughout the digestive system of the fish. For pure fish quality, I just don't think anything compares to this, in my very blatantly biased opinion. Now, the other food that I love is I love Spectrum's probiotics. Now, the probiotic bacteria is very good for the fish's digestion, but the bit that you might be interested in is when the fish poo, the bacteria in the poo eats the poo. So that is a very good function. So I find that with the tanks that I service, as soon as I convert them over to this food, I just find the tanks so much cleaner. Particularly when we're talking about doctors' surgeries and dentists and stuff where I service it once a month, and I vacuum the gravel and it's like putrid black, and I open up the filter and it's so disgusting. Then within a couple of months of changing them to Spectrum's probiotics, I find the tank is just so much cleaner, to the point where I'll even gravel clean and my bucket is completely white, or I'll open up the filter and it's completely clean. They're the sorts of results that I definitely see with it. So it's a game changer. So if it was up to me, I would feed my fish, let's say, within the vicinity of 60 to 80% Spectrum probiotics, but then I'll definitely put some Danichi in there as well. I just find the fish just look that little bit better as far as my biased opinion is concerned. Now, there's also different types of foods as well. So your pellets are my favorite. I am not a fan of flakes. Flakes are just so heavily processed, cardboard pizza sort of stuff. So a little bit of flakes okay if you think you need it for a particular fish to eat it. It is not my favourite thing to do. A little bit of nori every now and then is a good thing for your fish. Good way to sweep them out. Once again, I don't do it too much. I'll have those two foods as my main foods. A little bit of frozen food as a treat is something that I am very much a fan of. And then also feeding them like wafers are really great for grazing. So I'll chuck some of these bad boys in. And the reason why I like these ones is they're actually water stable. So it'll take sort of 24 hours with the Spectrum ones before they actually start breaking down and polluting your water. So that gives your fish a nice little window to eat the food before the food goes and starts polluting the place. So then what to feed? So having a good variety, different pellets, different pellet sizes is really helpful. A little bit of frozen every now and then, a bit of seaweed every now and then. So that's all good. And then do you have to feed a variety of food? No. If you fed like just say Spectrum and or Danichi, it's got everything that the fish need in there. And they've got so many different ingredients in them already, it would be just like getting 30 different ingredients and feeding one each day, or throwing them all in the blender and feeding them once. It doesn't really make any difference. Then the next thing is, how much do I feed? So I'll usually feed my fish what they eat in 30 seconds. So I'll put a bit of food in there, I'll watch the fish swimming around eating the food, and I want it all gone in 30 seconds, and that's a guide. So I'll then be watching the belly of the fish, and if your average fish has got a nice little belly, not a big fat belly, definitely not going in, then I'll alter what I'm doing according to what the average fish is. There's always one that's a bit fat, there's always one that's a bit skinny, so you don't use them as a guide, you use the average fish as a guide. And once again, whenever you're buying a new fish, it's just such a good idea to grab your phone, just make a bit of a video of your fish, regardless what sort of tank or even pond that you've got. make a video so we can see what's going on. We can see what's going on in the filter. It's also great just to open up your cupboard, let us see all the crap that's in there, because a lot of the time we might want to sell you something and we might look in the video and go, hey, look, you already got 2 of them. You can actually use it. So let us see the stuff you've got, and that will also give us an opportunity as your fish advisor to have a good look at your fish, because maybe you might not realize the fish are fat, or you might not realize that the fish is skinny, but we can comment on that as we go.
Scott said the fat ones need to drink more water.
Yeah, probably. Need more water. Well, this fat one needs some water.
Alright, you want to start wrapping it up?
So I've just done food. Let's just do a little bit more and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so let's have a quick chat about major elements. Now, so basically the solid structure of a coral contains calcium carbonate bonded by magnesium. Now, if your calcium carbonate and magnesium levels are good in the water, then the corals are able to diffuse these calcium carbonate, magnesium and so forth out of the water column, and then create a solid structure in which the corals can continue to grow. Because ultimately your corals are growing or they're dying. So in the old days, people would often come into me and say, oh, my corals live for a year. And I'll say, no, your corals don't live for a year. Your corals take a year to die, because your corals and your fish should grow. And if they're not growing, they're dying. So the macro elements is the first thing we need to talk about. So assuming that the corals have got good light, assuming the corals have got good water flow, assuming the corals have got nutrients, then the corals should be able to thrive. Now, if the corals are thriving, they're going to need macronutrients. So let's just grab these for a second. We'll promote a good old Australian brand. So, calcium, carbonate, bonded by magnesium. So, if you test these levels and then you create a dosing regime that works for you, then that's cool. Or you just get yourself a dosing pump and then you just turn it up a bit, turn it down a bit until you get these levels right. Because the plan is to understand your tank's input and output. So understand how much calcium does your tank use? How much carbonate does your tank use? How much magnesium does your tank use? So you can do that by manually dosing it, or better, you can do it by having a dosing pump. So I'll generally aim for a calcium level around 420, a carbonate level of around 8 DKH, and a magnesium level of, say, 1300. Now, at that level, my corals can grow. Now, if these levels start to fall, then what will happen is we'll start to exhaust the buffering capacity of the coral. So the coral's storing all this calcium and carbonate and magnesium within the solid structure of itself. Now, if the environment ends up becoming too soft and these levels are too low, then it'll actually call on its own reserves and it'll use up its own buffering capacity until it will eventually create a fatal situation. So keeping these levels up, super important, and they're what we call our macros. Then the next thing we need to do is keep our waste levels down. So the way that we keep our waste levels down is we need an organic carbon. Everything's out of bloody stock these days. Anyway, so something like a phosphate remover is a very good idea. And then an organic carbon product. So this is an organic carbon product for nitrate, and this one is a phosphate remover. Now, once again, as we discussed in what is now the previous video, because I managed to turn it off. Anyway, so if you understand your Redfield ratio and you're able to create an environment which is got the right amount of carbon versus the right amount of phosphate, then you can grow dephosphating bacteria. And then you can end up in a magical situation where you might have a dosing pump with them on it, and your waste levels and your macros are perfectly attended to. That's not always the case, because carbon dosing, I'll find, is very effective for nitrate, but it's not always effective for phosphate. So therefore, sometimes I need to use products like this that I will try to use for a short period of time. All of these sorts of phosphate liquids I will always run with polyfilter, because I will want to remove the residuals. And then there's other phosphate removers that are actually quite good, that can scrub out the phosphates. So getting your phosphate down, raising your nitrate, complying with your Redfield ratio, and then creating a dream situation where your waste levels and your macros are all perfectly in sync. And then that's a perfect situation. Now, doing it with dosing yourself is absolutely possible, but for me personally, I'd really much rather use a dosing pump. If I'm going to use any liquid phosphate removers, I will absolutely and totally always use polyfilter, because I want to remove any residuals. And then if I'm using any carbon dosing, then I will definitely want to have a protein skimmer, and I'll want to make sure that the neck of the protein skimmer is getting cleaned twice a week. So basically, if you have an environment that's high in those ones and low in these ones, then you've got a beautiful, thriving coral reef. If you've got an environment where these ones are starting to go up and maybe these ones are starting to go down, then you've got a beautiful Warrenora river, but the corals will slowly die. And then you will find that if you go up to Cairns or something like that and you're standing at a river mouth, then if you look out to sea, you'll see where the Great Barrier Reef is, and a healthy, happy Great Barrier Reef will have almost no advanced algae, just purely be coral. Then these levels will be nice and high, and mind you, we keep them much higher in an aquarium than they are in the wild. That's how we get success. So you can't always use the wild as a reference point. Then the river, let's say that you're standing at a river mouth, half a kilometre that way could be lots of corals and no algae, and then half a kilometre up the river could be lots of algae and no corals. And that's because the water runs off off the land, it picks up all the nutrients, then the nitrate and phosphate tends to raise, causes all sorts of trouble with these, often makes them fall, the more acidic properties, and then next thing you know, the algae's thriving and the coral's dying. So when you're creating an environment low in them and high in them, you'll find the algae just doesn't even grow. Like, for example, this tank here, if you look at this when the lights are on, it looks absolutely spectacular. It all looks crap at the moment because the lights are off and everything looks yellow, but anyway. You couldn't clean it if you tried, and you don't need to, because the water environment's right, so therefore the algae just doesn't really grow. You're creating an environment that's favouring the corals. Now, the next thing is nutrients. Once again, fish waste and fish food is often enough nutrients, but there are some great nutrient products. Like, there's a lot of corals now, such as gonioporas and that really need to be fed. So getting yourself a good coral supplement that you can spot feed the corals. And when you're spot feeding the corals, you don't want to get a pipette and squirt it at the coral, because if all of the tentacles start contracting, that's actually a defense mechanism, not a feeding. So when they're feeding, you'll see just one tentacle go in, then another one go in, and then another one go in. But if they all go in at once, then that's bad. We want them to go in at like one at a time, and then that's good. So watch the way your corals react when you're feeding them. And then the next thing to talk about is micros. Now, until recently, micro elements was just something that was just built on hopes and dreams. You just hope that it's going to be okay. But now we can actually check the micros. So we can send away ICP tests to labs like Triton. And I need more of them, Julian. Send me some more. And then you can actually find out what your micro elements are. So you can get a ICP test from Triton. You can have a look through at the lovely color charts that they offer you, and then you might change your routine. So there's various trace elements, supplements and so forth that you might use on the aquarium. And then you could find that, you know, using this one and that one and that one, you've got various double ups or various elements might be lacking, which until recently we didn't know anything about, because if in doubt, do another water change. Whereas now that we're getting a much better understanding of what's going on with the tank, we can start making better informed decisions about things like micro and trace elements. So micro and trace elements are really something that we're starting to understand more and more. But you'll find that our understanding, and that sort of works in with, so as far as test kits are concerned, just have a quick test kit chat, because I sort of need to start wrapping up now, because we don't want to make it too long. So first thing to understand is that most test kits for the aquarium industry are crap. Other test kits are quite good, but they're a total pain in the ass to use. So you don't really want to use test kits that are crap, because you can't trust the readings, and you don't really want to use test kits that are too hard to use, because you're never going to do them. So I really love these ones, and the JBL ones I find to be quite accurate, and the case looks really cool, and they're not hard to do. So finding yourself a test kit brand that you can do a test 3 times and get the same result, that's a good start. And one that you feel confident with, that you're competent to use and that you will actually use. As time goes on, it's going to get better and better. So like, for example, these things for freshwater are so awesome. I absolutely love them. All you do is get a little dipstick, and then you just put it against the color chart, and then it tracks everything for you. It gives you beautiful graphs. And it just takes 2 seconds to do. So testing is just going to get easier and easier and easier. And once again, every now and then, even if your tank's going well, it's really worth sending off an ICP test. Just, you know, get a good gauge of what's going on in your tank. So that's really important. So the last thing we're going to, let's say there, that'll do. That's where we'll cut it off. So there's some unbelievable apps available now that you can use as a logbook. In the old days, I'd just rule up a exercise book and record my results. But what I've really learnt over the years is that if you don't write down when you tested it, you don't have a damn clue. Because you think, oh yeah, I tested it last week. But it wasn't last week, it wasn't even the week before that. Because time goes so quickly that if you're not recording when you're doing your tests, you really don't have a clue. And you honestly sit there and think that you test your water every week, but you might even only do it once a month. It depends on your level of delusion. So with things like, as I said, as it gets easier and easier, things like this, you just get your dipstick, tick it in, and then it records when, what, and how. So testing is something that's just getting easier and easier.
What apps are there?
There's so many. I don't know. You overestimate my memory. No, I know there's lots of good apps available that you can record this stuff in. But the moral of the story is, if you're not testing it, then you just don't know. And you can also, when you want advice, to be able to give me your logbook or give me your charts or whatever, it really helps so much with determining various problems and various workable solutions for your aquarium. So that was today. So halfway through this video, I managed to delete the video. So both will be available. So if you just scroll down on this page, and if you want to watch part 1 or part 2 of this particular version, then there's also part 1 and there's part 2, and then there's now 2 parts in this particular one, and then we've got more subjects to cover. So if you have any other suggestions for us of other videos that you think we should focus on, then we're definitely interested. If you want to take a watch of the previous ones, you can either watch them on Majestic Aquariums TV or watch them by scrolling down on this particular thing. Do we miss any questions before we wrap it up?
No more questions, just the key one. If anyone thinks that kids would be interested in one of those.
So let me, Rebel can do that little spiel.
Okay. We're thinking about doing a kids class. If kids are interested in running tanks, we'd like to know roughly what time is a good idea. Being a school night, what time would be the right time to do it. So, love your feedback.
Anyway, thank you very much everybody for tuning in to what we're going to call part 3 of our, I don't know how many parts we've done so far, but we'll keep it up and keep up your feedback, keep up your questions, and we'll see you guys in the next video.
Getting rid of bubble now.
Oh, should we just...
We'll discuss that next time.
Okay, we shall discuss that next time. Oh, I did it again, eh? I do that every time. I just press the wrong button instead of... Which one's the off? Oh, finish. Look at that. It even says finish.